There comes a moment in life when you realize that what exhausts you is not the world itself, but the way the world keeps entering your inner space without permission. Thoughts, opinions, expectations, memories, fears, and emotional residues move through your mind like uninvited guests, dictating your reactions, shaping your moods, and quietly influencing the direction of your life. Many people sense that something deeper is possible, that peace, clarity, and conscious creation are not fantasies, yet they feel unable to sustain them. It is not a lack of desire, intelligence, or spiritual sensitivity. It is the absence of inner stability. At the core of manifestation lies a truth that is rarely spoken clearly. You cannot create a new reality while living emotionally hostage to external stimuli. Every time your emotional state is hijacked, your attention fragments, and with fragmented attention, your energy disperses. What you call destiny often begins as a repeated emotional pattern that was never questioned. The mind reacts, the body follows, and the future quietly repeats itself. This is why advanced manifestation is not about wishing harder or visualizing longer. It is about learning how to remain centered when the world attempts to pull you outward. It is about developing a form of inner sovereignty that allows you to feel deeply without being consumed, to observe without collapsing into reaction, and to choose consciously instead of habitually. When this happens, your frequency naturally elevates, not through forced positivity but through coherence. This video is an invitation into that coherence. It is not a promise of instant miracles, but a transmission of a method that teaches you how to protect your inner space, stabilize your emotional field, and gradually align your thoughts, feelings, and actions with the reality you wish to live. When your inner world becomes steady, the outer world begins to respond. The first foundation of advanced manifestation is not attraction, intention, or desire. It is mental shielding, not as resistance, not as emotional armor, but as lucid presence. Most people misunderstand what it means to protect the mind. They imagine distancing themselves from life, suppressing emotions, or becoming indifferent. Yet true shielding is the opposite of numbness. It is the ability to remain fully present without surrendering authorship of your inner state. It is the capacity to experience without dissolving into what you experience. Human beings are deeply conditioned to react. A look, a tone of voice, a delay, an unexpected message, or a memory can instantly shift the internal landscape. The body tightens, the mind narrates, and the emotional field collapses into patterns learned long ago. These reactions feel personal, yet they are mostly automatic. When left unexamined, they become invisible commands that shape behavior, decisions, and ultimately outcomes. What many call fate is often nothing more than a well-rehearsed emotional response repeating itself over time. Mental shielding begins the moment awareness interrupts this automation. Awareness does not eliminate emotion, it creates space around it. In that space, something subtle but powerful occurs. You stop identifying with every impulse. You start noticing the difference between feeling an emotion and being possessed by it. This distinction changes everything. The mind becomes a place you inhabit consciously rather than a battlefield you survive. There is a hidden cost to being emotionally reactive that few people recognize. Each reaction drains coherence, attention scatters, energy fragments, and intention weakens. You may still think about what you want, but your nervous system is rehearsing what you fear. Over time, the body memorizes these emotional loops, and the future begins to mirror them. This is not punishment nor coincidence. It is conditioning. Advanced manifestation requires a different relationship with stimulus. Instead of asking how to control external circumstances, the focus shifts inward towards stabilizing perception. When perception stabilizes, interpretation changes. When interpretation changes, emotional charge softens. And when emotional charge softens, choice becomes available again. Choice is the true birthplace of creation. Mental shielding is therefore an act of self-respect. It is the decision to no longer allow every external event to dictate internal reality. This does not mean avoiding discomfort. On the contrary, discomfort often becomes more visible at first, but visibility brings power. When emotions are seen clearly, they lose their authority to command behavior unconsciously. Many people attempt to protect their minds by controlling others, managing environments, or predicting outcomes. These strategies offer temporary relief, but reinforce dependency on external stability. The mind remains fragile because its safety depends on conditions it cannot fully govern. True shielding emerges when safety becomes internal, when the nervous system learns that presence is stronger than circumstance. This inner stability is not achieved through force. It grows through repetition and recognition. Each time you notice a reaction without immediately obeying it, a new neural and emotional pathway begins to form. Each time you pause before responding, the body learns that urgency is not always required. Over time, this creates a subtle but profound shift. You become less predictable to old patterns and more available to new possibilities. One of the most transformative realizations in this process is understanding that not every thought deserves engagement. Thoughts arise from memory, conditioning, and survival mechanisms. They are not always messages of truth. When the mind is unshielded, thoughts become commands. When the mind is shielded, thoughts become information. This shift alone reduces internal noise dramatically. As mental noise quiets, something unexpected happens. Energy returns. Focus sharpens. Emotional resilience strengthens. You begin to sense a deeper current beneath surface reactions. This current is calm, observant, and steady. It was always there, but it was drowned out by constant reactivity. As you reconnect with it, your frequency naturally elevates. Not because you force positivity, but because coherence replaces fragmentation. This is where manifestation quietly changes form. It stops feeling like an effort and starts feeling like alignment. Instead of chasing outcomes, you begin to embody a state that invites them. Instead of resisting what you do not want, you reinforce what you are becoming. The world responds not to your words, but to your consistency. Mental shielding is the gatekeeper of this consistency. Without it, every intention leaks. With it, intention consolidates. You no longer need to defend your energy aggressively. Your presence itself becomes protective. You remain open, yet grounded, sensitive, yet stable, aware, yet unshaken. In this state, life does not stop presenting challenges, but challenges lose their power to define you. They become experiences rather than identities. And from this grounded place, the process of creating reality shifts from effort to expression. The mind is no longer at war with itself. It becomes a clear channel through which higher coherence can move, shape, and manifest the life you are ready to sustain. If mental shielding establishes inner stability, frequency coherence determines what that stability begins to generate. Frequency, in this context, is not an abstract spiritual concept, nor an emotional high that comes and goes. It is the consistent quality of being that arises when thoughts, emotions, and bodily states stop pulling in opposite directions. Most people live fragmented. They desire one thing, fear another, and act according to a third impulse entirely. This internal incoherence is subtle, yet it is one of the most powerful forces shaping reality. The idea of elevating frequency has often been distorted into an expectation of constant positivity. This misunderstanding creates frustration because human experience naturally includes contrast, uncertainty, and emotional fluctuation. Coherence does not eliminate these movements, it stabilizes the center from which they are observed. A coherent state is not defined by happiness, but by alignment. It is the feeling of being internally unified, even when emotions rise and fall. In an incoherent state, the body often leads the mind. Old emotional memories surface, and the nervous system reacts before conscious awareness intervenes. The mind then follows, producing narratives that justify the reaction. Over time, these loops create a familiar emotional climate. Even when circumstances change, the inner weather remains the same. This is why some people feel restless even during success, or anxious even in safety. The frequency has not shifted because the internal alignment has not changed. Coherence emerges when awareness reclaims leadership. When awareness is present, the body no longer dictates reality through reflex alone. Sensations are felt, but they do not immediately become stories. Emotions arise, but they do not instantly turn into identity. This creates a subtle recalibration in the nervous system. The body begins to experience neutrality as safe and presence as grounding. From this place, emotional energy becomes available instead of reactive. Frequency elevation is often less dramatic than people expect. It does not announce itself with intensity. Instead, it reveals itself through steadiness. There is less urgency, less internal negotiation, less mental noise. Attention becomes less scattered, and the mind stops jumping compulsively toward imagined futures or unresolved pasts. The present moment gains weight and depth. In that depth, intention finds something solid to stand on. One of the quiet indicators of coherence is how a person relates to time. When frequency is unstable, time feels oppressive. There is a constant sense of being late, behind, or about to miss something essential. When coherence increases, time becomes spacious. Actions still occur, but they are no longer driven by panic or comparison. This shift alone changes decision-making profoundly. Choices made from coherence tend to compound positively because they are not rushed or reactive. Another subtle sign of elevated frequency is emotional resilience. Situations that once triggered prolonged inner turmoil begin to lose their grip, not because the person has become indifferent, but because the emotional charge dissipates more quickly. The system returns to balance with greater ease. This resilience allows energy to remain available for creation rather than recovery. Life stops feeling like a cycle of damage and repair and starts feeling like a process of refinement. Coherence also transforms perception. When internal alignment strengthens, the mind becomes less obsessed with control. There is less need to predict outcomes or manage every variable. This does not lead to passivity. It leads to trust rooted in clarity. The individual recognizes patterns without becoming trapped by them. Opportunities are noticed without being chased. Obstacles are acknowledged without being dramatized. This perceptual shift changes how reality responds because interaction becomes more intentional and less defensive. Frequency is reinforced through repetition, not through force. The body learns coherence the same way it learns tension, through consistent exposure. When calm presence becomes familiar, the nervous system stops interpreting it as absence or danger. This retraining is gradual, but its effects are cumulative. Small moments of coherence, sustained over time, reshape the emotional baseline. What once felt extraordinary becomes natural. As coherence stabilizes, desire itself transforms. Wants become clearer and less compulsive. There is a difference between longing that arises from lack and intention that arises from alignment. The former is restless and draining. The latter is calm and directive. Aligned intention does not demand immediate validation. It exists as a quiet knowing that guides behavior subtly but persistently. In this state, manifestation ceases to feel separate from daily life. It is no longer something that happens during isolated moments of focus. It becomes embedded in the way thoughts are formed, emotions are processed, and choices are made. The frequency you inhabit becomes the reality you invite, not through effort, but through consistency. Coherence does not promise a life without challenge. It offers a life where challenges no longer destabilize identity. The center remains intact. From that center, creation becomes less about changing the world and more about allowing the world to meet a version of you that is internally unified. And when that unity is sustained, reality responds in ways that feel both natural and deeply aligned. At a deeper level, creating reality is not an act of force but a consequence of pattern. What unfolds in life tends to mirror what is repeatedly reinforced within. Many people attempt to change outcomes while unconsciously preserving the same internal arrangements that produce them. They imagine a different future, yet they inhabit the same emotional posture, the same interpretations, and the same reflexive responses. Reality, however, does not reorganize itself around imagination alone. It reorganizes itself around consistency. Patterns are not abstract. They are lived sequences of perception, emotion, decision, and action. When these sequences repeat, they form grooves in consciousness. Over time, these grooves feel natural, even when they are limiting. This familiarity is often mistaken for personality or fate, but it is simply conditioning sustained long enough to become invisible. Creation begins when this invisibility dissolves. The mind often believes that change requires intensity. It seeks dramatic decisions, powerful declarations, or sudden transformations. Yet intensity without coherence rarely endures. What truly alters reality is not how strongly something is desired, but how steadily a different pattern is embodied. When steadiness replaces urgency, the system stops oscillating between hope and disappointment. it settles into direction. One of the most misunderstood aspects of manifestation is the role of identity. Identity is not a label, it is a posture toward life. It is the set of assumptions through which experiences are interpreted. When identity remains unchanged, new circumstances are filtered through old meaning. The result is familiar emotional responses appearing in new contexts. This creates the illusion of movement without actual transformation. When identity begins to shift, reality follows not because the universe is being persuaded, but because perception reorganizes behavior. Choices become aligned with a different self-concept. Boundaries adjust. Tolerance for what no longer fits decreases. Engagement with what resonates increases. These shifts may appear subtle from the outside, yet they redirect the trajectory of life. Creation also becomes clearer when the relationship with obstacles changes. Resistance is often interpreted as a sign of failure or misalignment. In a more mature understanding, resistance reveals where old patterns are still active. The emotional response to delay, uncertainty, or contradiction exposes the internal structures that have not yet integrated coherence. This exposure is not a setback, it is information. When information is received without self-judgment, it becomes liberating. The individual no longer needs to protect an image or prove alignment. Attention turns toward refinement rather than defense. Each challenge becomes a mirror rather than an enemy. In this mirror, unconscious habits surface gently, inviting awareness rather than confrontation. Another critical aspect of creation is the relationship with repetition. Reality responds to what is sustained, not to what is attempted briefly. Many intentions fail to materialize because they are not supported long enough to restructure internal organization. The nervous system returns to familiar states under stress, and with it familiar outcomes. This return is not weakness, it is training that has not yet been replaced. As repetition becomes conscious, it becomes deliberate. Patterns are no longer reenacted automatically, they are recognized as choices. This recognition introduces a pause, and within that pause, a different response becomes possible. Over time, these pauses accumulate. The old pattern loses momentum. A new one begins to stabilize. Creation also requires tolerance for ambiguity. The need for immediate confirmation often sabotages deeper shifts. When change begins internally, external reflection may lag. This lag can provoke doubt, leading the mind to revert to old behaviors for reassurance. When reassurance is sought externally, coherence weakens. When coherence is maintained internally, reassurance becomes unnecessary. This stage of manifestation is often quiet. There may be fewer dramatic signs and more subtle confirmations. Synchronicities appear not as spectacles, but as gentle alignments. Opportunities emerge that require discernment rather than excitement. The individual feels less compelled to announce change and more inclined to inhabit it. As patterns shift, emotional tone transforms. There is less craving for validation and more comfort with neutrality. Neutrality is not emptiness, it is balance. From balance, intention arises cleanly, without desperation or attachment. This quality of intention carries a different weight. It does not push against reality, it moves with it. Over time, the accumulation of aligned patterns creates a sense of inevitability, not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because direction is no longer questioned. The individual recognizes that reality is responding appropriately to who they are being, not to what they are asking for. This recognition dissolves impatience. Creation becomes a collaboration rather than a demand. In this phase, manifestation integrates fully into daily life. There is no separation between spiritual practice and ordinary action. Thought, emotion, and behavior operate within the same field of awareness. The future no longer feels like something to be chased. It feels like something unfolding in response to a self that has learned how to remain coherent, attentive, and present, long enough for reality to reorganize itself naturally. There is a phase in the process of conscious creation that is rarely discussed with honesty, the phase of sustenance. This is where understanding, insight, and even internal shifts either mature into a lived reality or quietly dissolve back into old habits. Many people reach moments of clarity, feel alignment, sense expansion, and then lose it. Not because something went wrong, but because sustaining a new inner state requires a depth of commitment that goes beyond motivation. Sustenance is not about intensity, It is about continuity. Reality does not respond to peaks of awareness as much as it responds to the baseline you consistently return to. The nervous system, the emotional field, and the mind all seek familiarity. When a new internal organization begins to form, the system often tests its stability by returning to old references. This return can feel like regression, but it is actually part of integration. What challenges most people at this stage is the emotional fatigue that arises when results do not immediately reflect internal change. The mind begins to question whether coherence is worth maintaining. Doubt subtly appears, not as a loud thought, but as a soft withdrawal of presence. Attention drifts. Old distractions regain appeal. The internal posture loosens. When this happens repeatedly, the system learns that coherence is temporary, and the pattern reasserts itself. True sustenance emerges when coherence is no longer dependent on external confirmation. When inner alignment becomes self-reinforcing, it stops requiring constant validation. This does not mean indifference to results, it means freedom from obsession. The individual remains engaged with life without turning outcomes into measures of worth or proof of alignment. This emotional neutrality is often mistaken for detachment, but it is actually maturity. At this level, patience reveals a new dimension. It is no longer passive waiting nor forced optimism. It becomes an active steadiness, a quiet agreement with oneself to remain aligned regardless of immediate circumstances. This agreement stabilizes identity. Instead of shifting roles based on mood or outcome, the individual inhabits a consistent inner position. That consistency becomes the anchor through which reality reorganizes. One of the subtle traps at this stage is the tendency to constantly reinvent oneself. Searching for new methods, new perspectives, or new explanations can feel productive, but it often fragments coherence. The nervous system cannot stabilize when the internal framework changes repeatedly. Integration requires repetition within a stable structure. When the structure remains intact, depth replaces novelty. Sustaining a new frequency also changes the relationship with effort. Actions feel less forced and more precise. Energy is no longer wasted on internal conflict. Decisions carry less emotional charge and more clarity. This efficiency is not rushed. It is calm. The system learns that forward movement does not require tension. As tension dissolves, endurance increases naturally. Another important shift during this phase is the transformation of self-trust. Early in the journey, trust is often placed in techniques, information, or external guidance. As coherence stabilizes, trust gradually relocates inward. The individual becomes familiar with their own signals. Intuition sharpens, not as a mystical voice, but as a clear sense of resonance or misalignment. Choices begin to feel obvious rather than debated. Sustenance also brings a new relationship with silence. Silence no longer feels empty or threatening. It becomes nourishing. In silence, the mind rests from constant evaluation. The body relaxes without distraction. Presence deepens. This depth reinforces coherence more powerfully than effort ever could. Silence becomes the space where alignment recalibrates itself. As this internal stability strengthens, the individual may notice a shift in external dynamics. Relationships change. Some connections naturally loosen while others deepen. Opportunities appear that require discernment rather than urgency. Life seems to invite participation without pressure. These changes are not dramatic announcements. They are subtle invitations that match the new frequency. It is common at this stage to realize that the desire for control has diminished. Control was once a strategy to manage uncertainty and emotional vulnerability. As inner stability grows, uncertainty becomes tolerable. Not knowing no longer triggers collapse. This tolerance allows reality to unfold without constant interference. Creation becomes less about manipulation and more about cooperation. Sustaining coherence also reveals the importance of rhythm. Life moves in cycles of expansion and integration. When this rhythm is respected, there is less resistance to periods of rest or introspection. These phases are no longer interpreted as stagnation, but as consolidation. Energy gathers, reorganizes, and prepares for the next movement forward. Over time, sustenance transforms the entire experience of manifestation. It no longer feels like a separate practice or goal. It becomes a way of inhabiting the world, The individual recognizes that creation is always occurring, whether consciously or unconsciously. The difference lies in participation. By remaining present, coherent, and internally unified, participation becomes deliberate. This is where the method completes itself. Shielding the mind establishes stability. Coherence elevates frequency. Pattern awareness redirects creation. Sustenance allows the new reality to take root. What once felt elusive becomes familiar, not because life has become perfect, but because the inner foundation no longer collapses under change. From this foundation, reality continues to respond, not as a reward, but as a reflection of a self that has learned how to remain whole within the unfolding of life. What has been revealed throughout this journey is not a promise of control over life, but an invitation into mastery of self. True manifestation is not about bending reality to your will. It is about becoming so internally aligned that reality has no choice but to respond to your coherence. When the mind is shielded, it stops leaking energy through constant reaction. When frequency is elevated through alignment rather than force, the body and emotions stop sabotaging intention. When patterns are seen clearly, repetition becomes conscious instead of compulsive. And when sustenance is established, transformation stops being temporary and becomes embodied. The most powerful shift that can occur is the realization that nothing outside of you has ever held real power over your destiny. External events may influence, challenge, or test you, but they do not define you unless you surrender authorship of your inner state. The moment you reclaim that authorship, life stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts feeling like something that unfolds with you. This is not arrogance or illusion. It is responsibility paired with awareness. Many people search endlessly for techniques, signs, confirmations, and guarantees. Yet the deepest transformation occurs when the search quiets and presence takes its place. When you are present, you notice how often you abandon yourself through distraction, urgency, or emotional identification. And when you notice this without judgment, something extraordinary happens. You begin to return, again and again. Each return strengthens the inner structure that supports a new way of being. This method is advanced not because it is complex, but because it requires honesty. It asks you to see where you give your power away, where you fragment your attention, where you negotiate your worth with outcomes. It does not shame you for these patterns. It simply reveals that you can choose differently. Choice, sustained over time, becomes character. Character, embodied consistently, becomes destiny. As coherence stabilizes, manifestation loses its mystical haze and becomes grounded. You no longer need to force belief or maintain emotional highs. You learn how to remain centered in neutrality, calm in uncertainty, and present in motion. From this state, desires clarify, actions align, life responds, not always instantly, not always dramatically, but reliably. The reality you desire is not created in moments of intensity, but in moments of integrity. Integrity between thought, emotion, and action. Integrity between intention and presence. Integrity between who you say you are becoming and how you show up when no one is watching. This integrity generates a frequency that cannot be faked and does not need validation. When you live from this place, manifestation becomes less about getting and more about allowing. You stop asking whether you are aligned and start living as if alignment is your natural state. The world does not become perfect, but it becomes responsive. And in that responsiveness, you recognize something profound. The peace you were seeking was never waiting in the future. It was waiting in your capacity to remain whole now. And so the real question emerges, not as a concept, but as a mirror. If nothing outside of you needed to change for you to remain centered, clear, and sovereign, who would you become? That question is not meant to be answered quickly. It is meant to be lived. If this message resonated, if you felt clarity, grounding, or recognition while listening, it means something within you is already aligned with this path. This channel exists to support that alignment, to deepen understanding, and to sustain coherence over time. By subscribing, you stay connected to teachings designed to strengthen inner stability, elevate awareness, and support conscious creation in a grounded and mature way. And before you leave, continue watching the next video on the screen. It was chosen to expand what you've just received and help integrate it more deeply into your daily life. This is not the end of the journey. It is a continuation, Stay present, stay aligned, and allow the unfolding to meet you where you are.